This week on the Nittany Dispatch, we discuss the beginning of the early signing period and Penn State's Big Ten championship matchup with the Oregon Ducks this Saturday. This week on the Nittany Dispatch. Hello and welcome to the Nittany Dispatch. I'm John Sauber, Penn State beat writer at the Center Daily Times. She's Audrey Snyder doing the same at The Athletic. And Audrey, it is officially December and there are too many things going on.
Take a breather, John. We got to take a breath today. We're recording this on Wednesday, which is the early signing period. Also, James Franklin will speak to the media after practice Wednesday night to outline kind of his thoughts on Oregon and I guess also the signing class. I'm not totally sure. And whatever else is going on. And the transfer portal is starting to fire up officially, revs into gear next Monday. Bowl selection will be this coming Sunday. It is a grab bag of chaos around here.
And we will be covering all of it. And if you would like to leave a 5-star rating and review, that would be very helpful on Apple Podcasts. Both those things help us out quite a bit. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that thumbs up button down below and hit the subscribe button as we continue the march toward 2,000 subscribers. But yes, all of that is coming. We will be on top of all of it. But for now, I think we can touch on this recruiting class, but the main point today is going to be talking about Oregon and what Saturday means, what happens from it. This class to me is not underwhelming. It is whelming, right? Like it is.
It is whelming.
It is perfectly whelming. Now it's a group that they can kind of supplement a foundation to or foundation of with it. It's a group that's missing some of that high end talent. Penn State's missed on some of those highest end targets. 4-star corner Brandon Finney went to Oregon. Michael Carroll, someone that they were in on early, is at Alabama. It has not been a banner day when it comes to the highest end recruits. But as I talked to On3's Ryan Snyder this week for a story that you can find on CenterDaily.com. One of the things he said is they've got a bunch of guys that are in that 100 to 500 range, right? Like they have that
pretty wide range, but yeah.
But I mean, that's
right.
Generally 4 stars, right? Yeah. Those are 4-star recruits. And the way On3 does it, the top 400 players in the country and the On3 industry rankings are all 4 stars. So they're all in that, high 3-star, low 4-star group that can contribute at Penn State, but none of them are the elite high-end talents that I think we've seen Penn State has been able to get in recent years. And I think that will probably change moving forward as revenue sharing becomes, a bigger part of this.
Yes and no. I mean, that was something we just got off of Zoom with Penn State's recruiting coordinators or their personnel folks rather. And that revenue sharing was one of the things that came up. Penn State is very well positioned, with revenue sharing, and that kind of helps make up or will for some of the NIL shortcomings, which is interesting when you kind of look at, we always hear the $20 million mark with Ohio State, right? And those types of things. And something that's kind of stuck with me this week, John, I don't know how it got into my frazzled mind this week because there are a lot of things in this frazzled mind this week, but I just remembered, maybe it was last year, maybe it was 2 years ago, but I remember James Franklin saying that after Penn State won the Big Ten championship in 2016, that they missed their opportunity to be bold and aggressive. And that was a misstep for this program in terms of pushing forward into that next level. And so that's kind of in the back of my mind for this week, right? Because if they do win Saturday, does that change the trajectory for the next class, right? This ends up being, at this point, a 1-quarterback class with Beckham Kritza in the fold. And I was just on the Zoom with Kenny Sanders, who had some really interesting insight on Kritza, who he thinks is an underrated player who's going to kind of shoot through the roof from their estimations. He said, hey, he's going to be working with Danny O'Brien, the quarterback whisperer is what he called him. So they feel really good about that. But I mean, Kritza is someone whose high school career has spanned multiple high schools. He's the guy.
4 of them, I believe.
Many of them. So many of them that we've lost track. But he's, the player who committed right after they got rid of Mike Yursich last year. Like he was there that day, then commits. Also, the other interesting thing about this time of year is kind of the coaching carousel is revving up again. And what does that mean for a Penn State team that's ranked 3rd in the country? You're starting to see the stuff out there about Andy Kotelnicki potentially interviewing at West Virginia. And Oh yeah, remember Jaywan Sider's time at West Virginia. Does that matter at all, right? Like, you have people, again, this is the problem when you're a successful program, right? Everybody wants your coaches. And so that's kind of going to be something else that's going on right now too.
Well, and to go sort of piece by piece with that, I do think it's, I understand them talking up Beckham Kritz and everything, but I think if they were supremely confident in him, they wouldn't also be targeting Bryce Baker, who committed to North Carolina, right? Like, I think that's important to note that as well. As far as they missed the chance to be bold and aggressive, I laughed when you said that, because Mike Rhodes, Penn State men's basketball coach, always says bold, different, aggressive, and this was something that they emphasized to tie this into what we're talking about. After Micah Shrewsbury leads the team to the NCAA tournament, Penn State men's basketball needed to restructure NIL severely. Mm-hmm. They needed funding for one, but they needed to allocate things better. It just had to improve. They hire Rhodes, who capitalized on that and was able to, help get some of that funding. Part of the job of being a head coach is being a fundraiser as well. I think that applies to Rhodes and James Franklin.
Yeah, everybody.
But men's basketball under Pat Kraft was able to take that momentum and turn it into something else where, frankly, NIL is not much of an issue for Penn State men's basketball. I would argue it's a bigger issue for football right now than it is men's basketball, and that's a testament to how the men's basketball program has done with regard to NIL and fundraising.
It's also a drastically different roster size. I think that's the other piece to it too.
Yes,
right?
But to be able, it's also a drastically less popular team, right? And there are fewer donors that they have access to, and I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. There are donors who have interest in both who have given more money to basketball. And I think that is important, not just higher percentage, more raw dollars, right? And I think that is something football needs to capitalize on with this Big Ten championship game appearance. I do think they're right. Like, revenue share is going to make things easier, but teams with good NIL will still have a massive advantage. Oregon is going to dominate everybody in that space for a long, long time. As long as Phil Knight has money, that is going to be the case.
Uncle Phil's going to be writing the checks. And that's kind of the interesting thing when you try to get those ballpark figures and what is that number for Oregon. And obviously, again, we always hear the 20 million for Ohio State. James Franklin said earlier this week on Sunday that, he studies all these things with the numbers and the details. Well, I'll push back a little bit on that in the fact that these are not publicly readily available numbers, right? There's a lot of that. Now, I'm not doubting that he's studying these things and the numbers that he's seeing. But I think that's kind of where I know the fan perspective and even the reporter perspective, where it gets frustrating with NIL because of that. And I will say, I wrote a story this week on The Athletic about Abdul Carter and how I believe he is Penn State's X factor in this postseason. And Big Ten Player of the Year, because, postseason awards also came out this week, John, because, what a week. So he's the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year quickly after making that position switch. But one of the things that Abdul's father told me, and I got much more in depth on this in the story, but is that they feel Abdul was fairly well compensated here. Like, they were happy with that piece. But the way in which they went about the NIL compensation was through his representation with Drew Rosenhaus, who handles the NIL opportunities for Abdul. They they got creative with RSR, Rosenhaus Sports Agency, and went about it through the representation as opposed to with the collective necessarily. So again, there are so many different factors out there with NIL, and I know some fans hate to hear it or some don't want to hear about it. I know Penn State, I got the email, they did launch a campaign this week, Happy Valley United, trying to raise money for, because of this. We've seen it this year with, Ryan Barker kicks a game winner and Dom Ruley and these, walk-on players that they're trying to fundraise for too. So it is just one layer to this week, one wrinkle to this week, but I do think it's also fitting that you're getting Penn State going up against number one Oregon that is also kind of seemingly, probably, maybe printing money at this point with Phil Knight.
Flipping whoever at once on signing day too. Like, their class is pretty absurd. I do think it is important to note that just because Penn State does not have this monster recruiting class coming in, it doesn't mean that players can't come in and improve. You mentioned the transfer portal. I would anticipate. Yeah. Penn State's not going to turn into Oregon suddenly with the portal and build an not an entire roster, but a large chunk of a roster out of the transfer portal. But I tend to believe they're going to be fairly active in going after some high end guys in the portal this offseason.
Wide receivers, all of them. They need all of them.
I said off season. It's not the off season yet. I don't know what to call this. December. This December. Yeah, this December. But yeah, it is. So this roster for next season is not done, and most importantly, this season for now it's not done. Right? Like this is all
Far from it.
we're trying to do the stuff that turns into next year's team while this year's team is still playing out and chasing the thing that why you add all
The
those
whole
guys,
point?
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
like the whole point of it. Which made it very funny to see Ryan Day say that, maybe winning the whole thing can turn things around a little bit after losing to Michigan. It's like, man, they really hate Michigan. for a national championship not to turn things. That is to say, too, there was one other thing you mentioned, the coaching changes I wanted to touch on. The reporting today from The Athletic, your colleagues, that Lincoln Riley was a target, might be a target. I don't know. I think currently probably still is the proper phrasing. Go read that at The Athletic. A
There's
target
the plug.
of UCF is interesting. And I think USC potentially coming open is interesting. And I think that's probably where that conversation has to end for now. It could be.
John, don't tease.
I didn't say
Don't
anything.
tease.
I just think it could be impactful for a lot of reasons. They're a team in the Big Ten.
That sound you hear is John trying to torpedo our January. And
I don't trust me. If everything stays status quo, it would be better for me.
That's always been right. I think there's a conversation to be had about the hierarchy of Big Ten jobs and where does USC fit into that, and the fact that Lincoln Riley has failed so miserably there is really impressive. I mean, it is. I remember we go back to when Drew Aller was being recruited and that job comes open and James Franklin is, reportedly interested in that, and Lincoln Riley gets the job, and that's a school with a lot of resources. That's a school that's really hungry to win. And for so much that we've heard this year, really the last 2 years about Penn State and alignment and being, lockstep and moving forward, other programs have done that for a longer time or have done that more they're more ahead of the curve, or they have deeper pockets, right? Fan bases with bigger donors perhaps is definitely part of that. But yeah, so I think that's like another one to keep eyes and ears out on. But yeah, this is a Penn State coaching staff that I think there's certainly going to be some interest, because that's what happens when you're the third ranked team in the country. We saw Tom Allen is among the Broyles Award semifinalists. They trimmed the list from 65, maybe down to 12 or 16, something like that Tuesday. But he made 15. The cut. 15.
Yeah.
Something. He made the cut. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think this is a staff that's going to have a lot of interest. The Andy Kotelnicki stuff is interesting. I would make note to say, like, when you see these tweets, when you see these reports, be aware of the wording. The initial report on Andy Kotelnicki was not Andy Kotelnicki is going to interview at West Virginia or Andy Kotelnicki is a candidate for this job. It is Andy Kotelnicki expects to be interviewed, right? That is very specific phrasing. And I think it's important to note those kind of things from a journalistic standpoint, obviously.
To win the lottery.
Right. Like, that's obviously better odds for Andy than you, but
for sure.
I think it's important to note that, and
there's a lot of posturing this time of year that comes from agents. That's the other thing you have to keep in mind, right? So it's easy when you see stuff online to say, "Oh wow, I see this. I'm going to jump through 12 levels of 12 hoops and say this is it." Again, there are highly compensated people who are hired on these coaches' behalf to float their names for jobs. And you see it sometimes, and this is not a reference to Andy, but with, hey, let's float a name and see how the fans respond to this. If it's a controversial hire, you see that happen a lot. So again, just kind of how the sausage is made, keep that in mind.
Yeah. And listen, I'm sure you did the same. Like, I check in with people when I hear things, when I see things, when I see reports. I don't think anything is imminent anywhere, right? Like, I think you probably agree with this. The most prominent thing that you heard was with Florida Atlantic and everything. They just hired their head coach, and not with Andy, to be clear, but they hired Zach Kitley to be their head coach. That's a great hire, by the way.
35, was he 35, 38?
33. I'm still younger than the youngest.
So now we're at the point where people younger than me are getting jobs like that.
Yes. But yeah, I think, we check in on those things when there is something to discuss. We will discuss it on here. I will report it. You will report it. Like, take a deep breath. These coaching searches take some time. I don't think there's anything imminent on any fronts. Coaches will interview for jobs that you never hear about, right? It happens all the time. It happens every single year.
And
And I think Penn State is in a good spot as things stand. And the only thing that Penn State fans would have to be concerned about would be, one, Kotelnicki getting an opportunity like that, or two, like the chain reaction effect, right, to losing a coach. Like if USC were to open up and they hire Coach X, that opens job Y, and then Coach Y takes up, right, like that can start to create a little bit of chaos that you don't anticipate. But for now, I think Penn State is in a good spot to prepare for.
Wait, I just want to go back real quick.
Okay.
Okay. One point about the coaching search and the stuff that you see and don't see. One of my favorite things I've written on The Athletic was a few years ago about how Penn State actually hired James Franklin. And one of the anecdotes that was in the piece that kind of stuck with me is just how crazy and how quickly these things move, even for people on the inside. I remember Brent Pry telling me, when James was a finalist at Penn State, that Brent was one of the few guys that knew, because James said, "Hey, like, if I'm going, are you coming with me? Like, you need to like talk to your wife and figure this out, but like keep this between us." And, there was a moment where James Franklin had the Vanderbilt staffers over to his house in Tennessee, and one by one called them upstairs to offer them a job on the next staff. And it was like, "Hey, the plane's leaving tomorrow morning. Either you're on it or you're not. And if you stay here, obviously we can't guarantee you're going to have a new job because there's a new coaching staff coming in." But again, just some context to how crazy and how quickly these things move, because that's where we're at.
And like, generally speaking, coaches like to keep a pretty tight circle on these things.
Yeah.
Agents are how a lot of info that becomes public, like with interviews and stuff. That's generally how that gets out. I can think of a coaching search that I covered. I won't be specific about this, where there was some anticipation that something may or may not happen, and then people very close to the coach in question did not know until it was public. Did not know until it was on Twitter. The people that would be directly impacted by it, people that pretty drastically directly impacted by it, did not know until it was public. And you have conversations, you find out too, like during searches, that you may know more than those people sometimes, right? Like
info swapping.
Yeah, like you find out something and you realize you're the first person to let this person know, and you assume that they knew. That has happened before. But yeah, it's very chaotic. I would, again, take a deep breath. Things will happen as they happen. And Penn State will potentially lose some coaches. They potentially may not, but I think the staff will be all right either way. Because generally James Franklin has done a good job of hiring people to help put them in position to play in the Big Ten championship game against Oregon, as we have finally made it 18 minutes into the Big Ten title game. It's just a chaotic month. Let's take a brief break from the podcast to discuss our friends over at Rhoback. Rhoback has some of the best polos, hoodies, joggers, shorts that you can find. I wear them all the time. I wear them to golf. I wear them casually. Wear them to work. As Audrey knows, this past Saturday it was very cold in Beaver Stadium for the game against Maryland. I was wearing a performance hoodie and performance joggers, and I was pretty cozy the entire time. And if you would like some Rhoback gear, you can get it too over at Rhoback.com. If it's your first order, use code TND20 for 20% off. That's code TND20, as in the Nittany Dispatch 20. But yeah, Audrey, listen, very, very infrequently that I'm not wearing Rhoback of some sort.
Well, that's my question, John. How much Rhoback gear can you stuff into your suitcase for the trip to Indianapolis this weekend?
So I will have 3 hoodies in all likelihood, one for Saturday, Sunday, Monday each, and I will have 3 pairs of joggers, one for Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and that'll and a hat that I usually wear that I will have as well.
See, I feel like
I will be. Hold on, we're not done
yet.
Not and on Friday when I board that flight, I will be wearing a Rhoback performance hoodie as well.
Yeah, I think our listeners need to know, this is where I expose John. When we go on these trips, one of us has a big suitcase, the other of us brings next to nothing. And it's the woman who travels with next to nothing and the man who travels with way more shoes than me. So
let's be clear. Let's be clear. I usually only take a backpack. This weekend, we're going for an extra day. Got to take the podcast equipment with me. I am packing a little heavier.
Blame the microphone, John. Sure.
Yeah, it's because, and listen, I have tons of pairs of Jordans. Yes, I will be taking Jordans with me, and my Rhoback gear, because Rhoback is the best, and you can use code TND20 for 20% off your first order over at Rhoback.com. Now, back to the show. This is an Oregon team, ranked number 1 in the country, ranked top 10 in both offense and defense in ESPN's SP+. A very, very good team on both sides of the ball, elite team on both sides of the ball.
Yeah.
I think not the Oregon team that you're probably used to seeing and hearing about. Like, they're still just as fast as ever. That has not changed. But I think what Dan Lanning has brought to Oregon that has changed things, and honestly, this is probably where Lincoln Riley has had a misstep, especially with the USC joining the Big Ten. Dan Lanning has brought a level of physicality on both sides of the ball with offensive coordinator Will Stein and defensive coordinator Tosh Lupoi that is rivaling Big Ten teams, right? Like, their edge rushers, Mateo Uyunglele and Jordan Birch, are big, strong, physical, and fast, right? Like, they are freak athletes, and they're strong, they're powerful, and they're willing to use it. That isn't always the case when you look at these teams that have a ton of team speed, and Oregon's got plenty of that too. They're two wide receivers, Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson, two of the fastest players in college football. This is going to be a difficult matchup for Penn State. All that is to say, though, I think it's going to be a very close one, and I'm curious to know how, like, because I think bigger picture would probably go into this first. Is that why Oregon has been able to adapt so well to the Big Ten? Is there something else you are seeing why they've had so much easier of a transition than, is it just Uncle Phil's money? Right? Is
That
why it's
helps.
been easier for them than USC,
You
UCLA,
throw a lot of money
Washington?
at your problems, so that usually makes them go away, right?
Yes.
I think because that was one of the things that Dan Lanning was asked about on Sunday was the transition to the conference. And, Big Ten football, we always think about the play in the trenches and how important that is. And I think you hit it spot on, John. This is a physical Oregon team. And I didn't realize how much of I don't know how to say that, how much of a psycho, I gotta say it, how much of a psycho Dan Lanning is, but I've seen a lot of videos this week.
Yeah.
First of all, again, this speaks to like the overall production of the program and these like videos that they release after games. I've watched a few of them throughout the year just because they've ended up on my Twitter feed. And, they're putting out like these 12, 14-minute videos. And I remember watching the one after they came back to beat Wisconsin and how he played jump around at the team meeting that week and was like, this is what you're in for. Like, fourth quarter, we're going to embrace this. And it was like this super motivational thing that like totally works with 18 to 23-year-olds. And this past week, there's a video that surfaced that they not even surfaced, like they put out of them in the locker room at halftime with a helmet, and they've got I don't know, a hammer or a bat or something, and they're bashing skulls with this helmet.
I think it was a sledgehammer. Yeah, I think it was a sledgehammer.
But then I saw another video where he gave a player a bat. So, like, again, Dan Lanning has more crazy motivational tactics than I was aware of. Because the thing to me, John, when you talk about the transition into the Big Ten, and obviously they've got an elite quarterback with Dillon Gabriel, but to me, they're also kind of this like boring number one team. Like, there's not the juice behind them that you would expect, right? For your top team in the country, an undefeated team in a year, there's been so much chaos in the sport. It just, to me, it feels weird nationally. And I don't know if it's just that I'm not paying enough attention to Oregon because I'm so in the Penn State bunker, or it just seems like nationally, though, that's kind of the narrative. It's like, well, here's this number one team, but we'll see. What about Texas?
Well, part of it is the discussion nationally is a train wreck, and it always is. Especially now, it's become more magnified. By the way, Miami not being in the playoff, just ridiculous. Like, come on, what are we doing? That being said, I think a lot of that is because Dan Lanning deals with a lot of the same things that Ryan Day does, that James Franklin does, that he doesn't win this most important game, right? Like, in the past, he struggled with Washington when Washington was good. They haven't necessarily won the big game. And so I think there's just a healthy amount of skepticism, right? Like, just like there's, like, we talk about Penn State's ranked third in the country, and everyone is like, oh, geez, this is a fraudulent team.
But who have they beaten? They're going to get exposed Saturday. Yeah.
Right. Like, and they might, who knows? Maybe Oregon does. I don't know. But like, this is like, they're the number one and number three teams in the country, and it's being treated like it's number 7 versus number 10. Right. Like, and I think part of that is just the discussion about the SEC and this foregone conclusion that Bama and Georgia must be the two best teams in the country, and now Texas too. But the other part of it is they haven't met those moments yet. Right. And Saturday will be a chance for both coaches to meet that moment, and for Lanning to kind of dispel some of those discussions around him. Same with James. And I think whoever wins Saturday will have a lot more credibility which I find very funny because if going into it, people don't think either is
Number 1 seed,
credible,
yeah.
that suddenly just because you beat a team that other people, whatever, it's all very stupid. I think they're both credible, legitimate national title contenders. Both can win the national championship this year. Both can win this game on Saturday. To get into some of the X's and O's sort of aspect of this, one of the things that I'm going to be watching closest is how Tom Allen deals with that speed, right?
Yep.
The speed on the outside. Dillon Gabriel's mobility too. Probably have to have a discussion about Gabriel because I'm not as low on him as I am Will Howard, but I do not think
I know you're not a fan. I could see you when I said they've got an elite quarterback, you kinda
I don't
tensed
think
up.
he's not an elite quarterback. We'll get into that though. But I think the team speed on the outside and how they choose to deal with that with guys like AJ Harris and Jalen Kimber, who both have good speed, Kimber especially, will be interesting.
Speed.
Right. Yeah, of course, because they time them differently.
Because that's all that matters. Yeah.
Yeah, the stopwatches are different. But no, I think it'll be interesting to watch because part of this defense is not giving up those explosive plays, right? The bend but don't break, the Vic Fangio kind of style defense.
There you go.
Mentality, at least. Listen,
Jeff Hafley style.
Being bad.
Moving on.
The shell defense where you're not trying to give up explosive plays, you're trying to rally and tackle in front of you. And Tom Allen is creative. And from that standpoint too, they will show Oregon some looks that they probably haven't seen this year. They'll probably move Abdul Carter as they need to get him in advantageous positions to try and be a game wrecker, because I think that's going to be an important part of this too, right? Like how Penn State's defense as a whole deals with them, but also how the pass rush can impact this game, because Dillon Gabriel is looking to get the ball to weapons quickly, right? Like his accuracy, his anticipation, two of his best attributes, and his ability to get rid of the ball and throw it to a spot before the receiver is particularly close to that spot. One of the things he does best. I think if they can get pressure on him, that could be the deciding factor in this, right? If they can, he's mobile, but he's not.
And how do you bring that pressure, right? How many guys are?
Yes,
that's the other. Yep.
I think winning with 4 is going to be the biggest thing for Penn State, right? Like being able to rush those two edge rushers, Zane Durant and Devon J. Thomas, is going to have a massive impact on this game. And those guys are good enough to do it, right? Like I don't think they have to bring extra pressure, added rushers. They don't have to blitz. They certainly don't have to big blitz, which is usually 6 or more rushers. I think, you might see them bring a 5th on occasion when they go to that prowler package. But even then, you're really risking it with Oregon's team speed. And so I think we will see Penn State's defensive ends have a massive impact on this game and probably be the deciding factor, I think. I don't know.
That's why I wanted to write it this week about Abdul being their X factor in the postseason, because I think, again, and kind of the whole narrative of Penn State, some people think they're, perhaps fraudulent at this point, a fraudulent number 3 team, right? Go figure. But you've got someone who is a top 5 pick, right, on your roster. You've got someone opposite him who's really freaking good too, and denied Dennis Sutton,
who I think should be a first-round pick. I don't like.
Yeah, like I to me, there is not. Oh gosh, I'm gonna channel James Franklin here, and I don't think enough people are talking about deny Dennis Sutton, because I don't. I mean, I think he's back to full health now, which that's kind of been the story the last month for him, and getting back to that point. So I think that's notable. But that is, you have guys who can take over a game, who can tilt the playing field. When you look at, a star-studded roster on the other side with Oregon, Penn State has enough superstar potential on this roster, whether it's Drew Aller, whether it's Nick Singleton, whether it's Abdul, whether it's Deny. I mean, take your pick. It's the 2022 recruiting class that's been geared up for this moment, right? With some other guys, of course, mixed in there as well. But I just think that's getting lost a bit in the conversation and the storylines this week. The other part, again, playing inside in a fast chat, not a fast chat, in a fast track. I think that's the other piece of this. And I really don't even think that necessarily favors one team more than the other. Like, I think this is a good thing for Penn State that you're playing in a climate-controlled environment. We saw it last year at Ford Field, right? Peach Bowl last year. There were a lot of other things going on in that game.
Yeah, really... Yes, there were. By the way, I've never been so willing to throw out a game result in
such a forgettable game.
Just even like from a what does this mean standpoint, nothing. It doesn't.
It means they need a wide receiver. Yeah, that was the.
Yeah, But even then, it like there was so much chaos behind. Like they don't have a receiver now, and they're the number 3 team in the country. So
okay. So here's my other when we're talking about X factors, and I wanted to bring this up.
real quick, I wanted
Yeah.
to just say my piece on Gabriel
Okay.
before we switch to
Oh
the
yeah,
offensive
yeah.
side of the ball for Penn State. Listen, Dillon Gabriel's very good. His season reminds me a lot of Bo Nix's last year, where I thought the production was outstanding. He was good. He was excelling in a system. But the biggest reason Oregon is finding success is those playmakers and Will Stein, much like it did last year with Bo Nix at quarterback. I don't really believe in Dillon Gabriel as a Heisman contender. The numbers are outstanding, like I said, but he is not what makes that offense go. He's done an excellent job in that situation. He's excelled there. I just don't think I think there are probably 5 to 7 other quarterbacks in college football that I would put if you put them in that offense, that they would have just as much success. Well, they would have more success, quite frankly. And so I think that's the biggest thing for me. That's not to say I'm not going full Will Howard. I think he's going to lose them games or anything like that. This is not the case. But I know I'm lower on him than the consensus, so I thought it's worth mentioning that I don't think he's like one of the 3 to 5 best quarterbacks in college football.
John, that could also be good news for him because every Sunday when I sit down to watch the NFL, I have that moment, or Monday, I say, what the hell happened to Bo Nix? Like
Sean
the guy that we
Payton.
saw at Auburn.
Yeah, I want to be clear about that. That's Sean Payton. Sean Payton's excellent at his job.
It's
It
so
blows
wild.
my mind.
Yeah, you watch Bo Nix now and you're just like, what in the world? Like we had the Sean Clifford Bo Nix experience, not once, but twice.
Yeah. Totally different quarterback now than he was then.
Yeah, and it's baffling. So the flipping it over to the Penn State offense here, and X Factor talk. Julian Fleming was a guy who we had a chance to talk to this week in Target in State College.
Yes.
Penn State had, maybe about 15 players Monday on their off day. They were doing a shopping spree for Toys for Tots at the State College Target, which was really a nice event to see them kind of just going shopping and like they're shopping for little boys and girls for Christmas gifts and just a really again, it's their day off. It's the biggest game of the year coming up for them. Don't need to do that, but they're doing it. So I wanted to mention that. But anyway, we're interviewing Julian Fleming in the magazine aisle at Target Monday night.
Yes.
Because somehow that's just how this industry works sometimes. And I asked him about this past weekend because we hadn't talked to him since, the Penn State win on Saturday. And I said, what was this like for you? Like, were you scoreboard watching with the game or what? And he's like, well, he admitted it. He's like, yeah, it was tough. Like, it was tough for me because, the team up north was which also I love that Julian Fleming has never referred to Michigan as Michigan. He still calls them the team up north. Like, it's just, and he said, understandably, that was a huge part of his collegiate career. And, seeing his old teammates have to lose in order for Penn State to get in was just a really interesting, weird, tough human element, for him. But he said, hey, we're happy we have an opportunity to be here in this game. John, there's also an opportunity for Mr. Fleming, potentially even bigger because we'll see Wednesday whether or not Trey Wallace is out on the practice field. I believe James said Sunday when we last heard from him, they were optimistic that Trey would play.
Yeah, I think he said he usually uses the term hoping to have someone. I think that's what he said. But yeah, this is going to create a void, right? Wallace has been better of late. They've been more consistent of late, getting the ball to him. Not necessarily producing Tyler Warren numbers or anything like that, but he has been an important part of the offense. If for whatever reason he can't go, then that is obviously a big hit. That being said, I don't know that this game is going to come down to how the wide receivers play because I think it's more going to come down to what Andy Kotelnicki can do to use Oregon's speed against them, right? To use some of that aggression against them. And I think it will be a lot of Tyler Warren. Shocking, I know.
Stunning.
It will be a lot of using those wide receivers in spots they excel in. Amari Evans deep shots, Julian Fleming in the middle of the field. Getting the ball to those guys in their best positions to work. And it'll be a lot of Singleton and Allen, Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, because it always is when this offense is going well. And it will be on Drew Aller to hit on those throws. And I think Aller's going to be asked to hit on some difficult throws, which, by the way, he's done a bunch this year. The more I go back and rewatch Penn State games, because I've spent, one, I've barely slept this week, but two, when I should be sleeping, I've been watching.
John, that's choice.
Barely a choice at this point. But when I've spent a lot of time when I should be sleeping watching Oregon All-22, Penn State All-22, and I just continue to be impressed with the year that Aller has had. And this could be a chance for him to have his moment, right? To have this frankly, career changing, potentially
Well,
trajectory changing moment, because it could
John.
impact a decision moving forward too if he plays well.
That's where you went, and I was gonna lay the trap for you, but you stepped right in it without me even having to lay it. Do you think, because again, this is a thought I wrote about Drew Aller last week and kind of his pro potential as we come down, the home stretch of this season, which could go on for another 6 weeks. Who knows? 7 weeks, I guess, the January 20th.
Oh God.
But this is the fun part of the year. But do you think, is this the last we see of Drew Aller? Because the thought that I have is you are entering this time of the year where you're getting more eyeballs on you. You have a chance to shine. And if Penn State goes on a deep playoff run and Drew Aller tears it up, I think then we maybe are looking at potentially the end of the Drew Aller Penn State career. But again, that's me saying it, not him saying it.
Yes,
But I think it's something that fans probably should think about.
I think that is a really good way to put it. I think if they go on a run, then it is increasingly likely that that's it for Drew Aller at Penn State, and he could go to the NFL. If they don't go on a run, I would lean the other direction. I think that there's a better chance that they would run it back, that they would basically try again next year with a lot of these guys. I don't think, trying to be very careful with what I say here,
Why, John? Who would hold it against you? Would anyone hold it against you?
Right. I don't want to turn this into
actually. Producer Mike, can you Mike or whatever John's about to say? Can you just clip this?
Yeah, I don't want this to end up on a message board or on social media in a thing that I'm reporting, because I'm not reporting anything, to be clear. But I think there's a decent shot that they're trying to do this with more guys than Drew Aller, right? That Penn State is going to try to retain its roster talent, to go back to the discussion we were having at the beginning of the podcast, because they always emphasize that. And they want what's best for the players. And sometimes that can align for Penn State and the player. And if they can make it what's best for the player, I think that's good for everyone.
But they don't talk people into coming back is the other thing, right? Like, yes. Abdul Carter, projected top 5 pick.
Abdul Carter's leaving.
This is it.
Right.
And I think
there are other guys on the bubble though. And that is I would go as far to say is Abdul was the only guy not on the bubble. And so I will be interested to see how all of that kind of shakes out moving forward. All right, so let's go on the record with this. Audrey, I will let you go first. Time? Yeah, don't say your player just yet, just the prediction for Saturday's Big Ten championship game.
Okay, so my prediction for Saturday, John and I, again, have not discussed this at all. I've got Oregon 27, Penn State 20.
Okay.
And here, I don't feel particularly strong with my prediction on this one. Again, I think that there's a theory that Penn State's going to get blown out. I would be very surprised if they do, quite frankly. Like, I don't think the talent discrepancy is as big as people think. I think if you look at Andy Kotelnicki, and I know people are going to point to Ohio State and the way the offense flatlined there, and I get it, that's fair. But I don't think that happens twice. Like, I think they learned from their lesson. I'm curious, though, and again, this is where this thing could swing, if Penn State gets out to an early lead, right? How would they play in that scenario versus if they're coming out and they're, coming from behind? I think you want to get out to a lead in this game. I think Penn State would probably be in a better spot that way. But again, the last time I was there in Indianapolis for a football game, none of that mattered. And that was kind of, so you have that in the back of your mind too. But yeah, I think this is a closer game than people think. And I think by Penn State keeping it close, I think the Nittany Lions then are getting a home playoff game in Beaver Stadium here in a couple weeks.
Penn State plus 3.5 point underdog, over under 50.5 for this game. Two important notes there. Audrey has Oregon covering and the under. I
do.
I went back and forth on this quite a bit. I am confident, I think, in the under of 50.5, just because I think the two defenses are stronger than probably getting credit for. I think it's going to be very close. Tough to ignore that Oregon has been as good as it has all season. Tough to ignore my internal thought that Penn State has the better quarterback in this matchup, that it has the best offensive weapon in this matchup, that it has the better defense in this matchup. I picked Penn State 21-20. Not a great feeling about it,
Interesting.
but I think they win. I think Georgia beats Texas, and I think Penn State's the number 1 overall seed heading into the college football playoff. I
Can you
tweeted this, by
speak
the
that
way.
into existence, John? Can you, because like selfishly, and now we're looking at how many weekends can Audrey get off in this crazy month of
3.
December.
Yeah.
Speak that into existence, John, because you said Penn State 21, Oregon 20, Penn State getting the number 1 seed, which of
Yes.
course would mean a bye.
Yes. That being said, if they lose this game, we'll get to our players we're talking about here in a second. But if they lose this game, I think Penn State should be the 5 seed. So the way I'm viewing this, and I have a story up on Saturday that I'll comment about this on game day. Penn State is playing the tougher opponent than Texas is, right? So if both teams lose, Penn State should stay higher than Texas is. Like, I know Texas is ahead of them right now. I'm saying they should be closer to their original ranking heading into the matchup than Texas should be, right? Because Texas would have proven twice that it can't beat this Georgia team, right? That is number 5 in the country, and number 7, I think, in the bracket.
Fighting Carson Beck's and number 1 in many fans' hearts in the SEC.
Well, yeah, many other fans, non-Georgia fans. But I think the loser of the Big Ten title game should be number 5, either way. And I think the winner should be number 1 either way, even if Texas wins. Because then, here's the thing. If Texas beats Georgia, I know they're avenging their only loss. Beating Georgia isn't as impressive as Penn State beating Oregon.
For sure.
And Penn State's loss to Ohio State is still a better loss than Texas losing to Georgia. So Penn State would have a better best win and a better
best
loss.
win.
Yeah, I know. A better best win and a better loss on their resume as one-loss teams. Like, I don't think there's a good argument for Texas essentially being ahead of them right now is the other part of this. Like, I think Penn State should already be ahead of Texas. But I also think that the result Saturday, unless Penn State gets blown out of the water by Oregon, which is possible. I mean, I think a lot of things are possible in this game. If that happens, then okay, Penn State should probably drop a few spots. Otherwise, they have the better resume than Texas, and I think they should be the higher ranked team than Texas pretty much no matter what, and should be ranked higher than Georgia unless Georgia wins the SEC and Penn State doesn't win the Big Ten.
Here's what I'm going to say, John. I feel like the thought of the loser of the Big Ten title game getting that coveted 5th seed, I feel like that absolutely would have held true if it was Ohio State. I feel like there could be a little bit of a discrepancy here with Penn State, but I do still think that Penn State is hosting. Because remember, 5 through 8, get that game on campus.
They cannot drop below 6. Like this idea that
if they get blown out, I don't think so. But again, the committee was like saying some crazy things this week.
Yes, I was really frustrated.
Up with Miami.
Yeah, I was really frustrated with the response, some of the responses to questions that Ward Manuel was asked. I did not think the committee handled this well. He's a spokesman for the committee, is why I say the committee, not just Ward. I do not think they handled this well. I think Miami should be in. Frankly, I think Alabama's a better team, but I've been making the argument against Miami that they had these 2 losses, 2 games that should have been losses against Virginia Tech and Cal. At the end of the day, they won those games. We can't do the conjecture stuff. Like, as much as I would like to, as much as I think Alabama's a better team, like it's a little ridiculous that Miami's in there. It's also very funny that Lane Kiffin thinks Ole Miss has any place in this conversation right now.
The politicking and posturing that has continued to go on is really just
well, and I think that the thing that frustrated me most about all of that is the committee saying if Duke or Louisville were to get into the top 25, it wouldn't impact it if teams lose and fall out like Army. Like, how does that not? If part of your reasoning is top 25 wins and you have a team that then would pick up 1, maybe 2 top 25 wins, what are we talking about? And Alabama lost to Oklahoma and Vanderbilt. Like, it's not like losing to Syracuse is better than losing to Vanderbilt, and losing to Georgia Tech is better than losing to Oklahoma. Like, Miami has better losses, fewer losses, and doesn't have that top tier win. But frankly, Bama tried to give that game away too when they played against Georgia. And so, like, I think that's all very ridiculous. All that's to say, I think that should be the case where the Big Ten loser is the 5 seed. I don't know if it will be. Notre Dame should not be moving up if other teams lose. I can't stress enough. And this idea that SMU can fall out of the playoff if they lose against Clemson is ridiculous. What is the reasoning not to just forfeit the game then? Why would you not just say, we're not going to play? Like, it's better that we don't play. Like, that's what I would do if I was SMU. And I got on Joey Galloway for saying that Indiana needs to play against Ohio State because it's a chance to cement itself in the playoff. Literally not playing would cement SMU in the playoff, right? Like I don't understand how these teams are locked into the postseason that are not playing conference championship games, but a team ranked ahead of them is not locked in. I think it's ridiculous. It's absurd that SMU wouldn't be in the playoff. And I think if the committee decides to do that, I think we should blow it all up and figure out something new, because that's ridiculous.
Metaphorically.
Yes.
I think you look at what is the risk versus reward of playing in a conference championship game, right? The risk certainly is that you get exposed, right? Maybe you get blown out, the wear and tear of another game, potential for injuries, right? Like you have that. But I can bring this back to Penn State. You have the reward of, if you win, you should be the 1 seed, right? Like that is, then you've got your path, you're cruising, but still that 5 seed would be supremely advantageous as well. So like, again, Penn State heads into this weekend in really, really, really good position either way. Like I think that's the important thing to remember.
And I think the discussion is different too, because I know this might sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth because I say that Penn State should want to be playing for the Big Ten.
John, you do this all the time. You picked Purdue, so
part of that is pick Purdue in August.
August, yeah.
But part of that is that Penn State is locked into the playoff. They're dancing, right? Like that's it. They're going to be there no matter what. If your chances of being in the playoff are at stake, it's a very different discussion. And again, I think it's ridiculous that SMU would even be on the bubble. Like it seemed to be indicated that they might be, just to sneak another garbage SEC team that can't beat whatever mediocre SEC team. And it's ridiculous. It's a stupid discussion. Let's get back to the Big Ten title game and our player that we are talking about on Sunday.
Well, I picked Penn State to lose, but I'm still going to pick a Penn State player that we'll be talking about in a losing effort.
No.
Why? You don't want that?
No.
Well, I'll give you 2 then. I'll give you 2.
Okay, that works.
So in a Penn State losing effort, I kind of tipped my hand a little bit earlier. This is definitely me fishing for a really good storyline, which is what I do here. I root for the storylines. Julian Fleming game. I think we see that. Again, I know this is going to sound crazy. I think you go back to, and I'm not saying he's going to break through, bust the stat sheet. I think we're talking about a couple like key 4th down conversions, kind of like the conversation we had after USC, where these are those big impactful moments. Fleming played in this game before when he was 19 years old. He's not 19 anymore.
He's not.
And he said, that was the biggest game of his career at that point, in his life. And so he remembers that. And man, that would be a really cool full circle moment for him. Again, I'm in the business of rooting for storylines, as is John, and that's a good one. But since I did pick Oregon to win 27-20, as I double check the score that I scribbled down on my paper, just to make sure I have that accurate, I'm going to pick John's guy, Dillon Gabriel. I think there are a couple scrambles that he has in him that maybe we see this defense get a little bit exposed. I think there's, some kind of dramatic end to this game, right? Maybe there's a game-winning drive in Dillon Gabriel, something like that kind of catapults him for some probably back into that Heisman conversation the day before ballots are due. So that could be a little bit interesting. But yeah, I didn't want to pick Tyler Warren because I feel like we've picked him a million times. But John, since you picked Penn State to win, who's your player that we're going to be talking about? I guess, so are we talking Sunday? We need to figure that out. How we're going to.
We'll discuss that too after we go through all this. What our plan is for this weekend, but I'll do the same that you did, since I picked Penn State to win. But if Penn State loses, I will say that we end up talking about Tez Johnson and his, how good he was in his return. I think he returned against Washington and his second game back against Penn State. I think he could be in for a big game if they're able to take the top off this Penn State defense. It's because of what Tez Johnson's able to do down the field. And I think that could be what kind of breaks this game open. Now, since I picked Penn State to win, who I actually think we're going to be talking about when we record a post-game pod at some point, that's Abdul Carter. I think this is going to come down to how well this defense can get to Dillon Gabriel, how much they can force him to make throws he doesn't want to make, force him to try to make throws that he shouldn't make. I think Carter ends up getting a sack in this game that really changes the dynamic, right? That kind of seals the deal here for Penn State.
Just a sack, or are you feeling a strip sack?
Strip sack, to be clear. I actually have this written in the story as a strip sack already.
Okay.
Just a little insight to close out the game and win Penn State. I think this is going to be a fantastic matchup. One that, so the current plan is, and don't hold us to this, is that
We have
Audrey
a plan,
and I,
John? Do we have a plan?
we have the,
We have a
I was
yeah,
going to
never
make a joke.
mind.
Yeah.
Never mind. Yeah. We have a plan.
Yeah, we have a plan. We will be back post game. The tentative plan is to hop on for 15 to 20 minutes to record a post game episode that covers mostly the game itself aspect of it.
Short,
Of course,
yeah. Short
the playoff
reactionary.
the playoff selection show is at noon on Sunday. So we want to be able to talk to you guys then about what happens there and what all that means. So the tentative plan is to have that post game show very late Saturday night, very early Sunday morning.
Kick isn't until 8:17 Saturday night.
We're looking at like 2 a.m. Like
yeah, probably won't be till very, very, very late Sunday morning, but it'll be something quick in your feeds, just reaction to the game. If Penn State wins, obviously there'll be some other things to talk about. If they get exposed, we'll have some other things to talk about. Close game, whatever. So about probably 20. We say 20 minutes. Probably going to be more than that because John and I.
This episode was going to be 30 minutes too, in case anyone's curious.
How well that went.
It is very much not. We were both very busy this week, and then following the selection show, there will be obligations that both of us have with regard to press conferences and writing and everything after the selection show. But at some point Saturday or Sunday evening, we plan on going live on YouTube. So those of you who watch on YouTube, watch out for that. We will put it on our social media channels when we plan on, finalizing a time for that. We have to figure out both of our work plans first.
We'll still be in Indianapolis Sunday, though. That's the good news. We're staying put Sunday through the selection. We're not flying back till Monday to make it a little bit easier logistically to kind of get all these things done.
Yeah, and once we get done with settling what we're doing for our day jobs, we will settle on a time and figure it out and put it out. So all of you who want to watch live on YouTube can do that. And then, of course, this will be up in your podcast feeds. As always, if you don't like watching on YouTube, if you prefer being an audio listener, of course, if you want to find that information, you can follow Audrey on Twitter at OddSnyder4 and find our Blue Sky. If you search Audrey Snyder, you can find me on Blue Sky. If you search John Sauber, and on Twitter at John Sauber, JONSAUBER. You can find all of my writing at CenterDaily.com. You can find Audrey's writing over at The Athletic. As I said, we will be back probably multiple times this weekend to discuss what is, potentially the biggest game of the James Franklin era. And I think that is
just a casual, and how much food I can consume at Cafe Patachu during 3 days.
They're going to get to know me very well over those 3 days, unfortunately for them. But that is all for now. I think this is a good place to leave it. We will be back following the Big Ten title game. I hope you enjoy it. And if you're going, feel free to reach out to us. Let us know.
We will be there.
Listen, if there's any places in Indianapolis that we don't talk about on here that we should go eat, let us know. We both appreciate that. And it's, for those of you who aren't listening on Spotify, the Spotify Wrapped is coming out for everybody now. So if we are on your Spotify Wrapped, please feel free to tag us on social media. Let us know. Let us know how much you listen.
John, did we make your Spotify Wrapped? I don't use Spotify, so
I don't listen to podcasts on Spotify. So yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, a real shame. But that'll do it for now. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great day.